This is the DJI Osmo Action 4, DJI's flagship action camera. And this is the GoPro Hero 12 Black, which is GoPro's flagship action camera. Together, they are two of the best cameras available on the market today. I've been using both of them for the past 2 months, and although they are both fantastic cameras, I do find myself reaching for one more than the other, and the reasons why might surprise you. So today we're going to answer the question of which camera is the better buy for mountain biking. Now first, as always, some disclosure. This video is brought to you by DJI. They reimbursed me for the purchase of this GoPro and are providing me a small commission in exchange for this independent comparison video. I agreed to make this video because largely I'm a nerd who loves cameras, but also because it's my job to make the highest quality videos possible. I need to make sure I'm using the right tool for the job, and this video provided an easy way for me to do that without a longer term contract. So thanks again to DJI for sponsoring this video. Before we jump into the comparisons, I'd like to provide a quick summary of what each camera promises to offer and my testing methodology. First up, we have the DJI Osmo Action 4, which was launched back in August of 2023. It can film up to 4K at 120 frames per second, has an ultra-wide 16:9 155-degree field of view, and most importantly, it touts a number of details that make the user experience more enjoyable. It also has dual touchscreens, a 1/1.3-inch sensor, and a claimed best-in-class battery life. On the other side, we have the GoPro Hero 12 Black. This camera was launched back in September of 2023 and can film up to 5.3K at 60 frames per second with a 151-degree field of view in an equivalent 16:9 aspect ratio. It also has an HDR video mode, a 1/1.9-inch sensor, and a 27-megapixel photo mode. For the camera alone, the Action 4 comes in at $299 US and the Hero 12 comes in at $349 US. For the Action 4 Adventure combo, which comes with the camera, multifunction charging case, 3 batteries, and an extension rod, you'll be looking at around $399 US, while a Hero 12 with a dual battery charger and their handle or grip will run you around $440 US. In order to make my testing as fair as possible, I've tried to keep my settings as consistent as possible between the two cameras. This means that they are both filming at 4K resolution, 30 frames per second, using their widest field of views, DJI calls this ultra-wide and GoPro calls this hyperview, and the lowest level of active stabilization to preserve as wide a field of view as possible. DJI calls this rock steady and GoPro calls this hyper smooth. Both cameras will also be using automatic exposure, 0 EV comp, no ISO limiting, low or zero sharpness and image noise reduction added, and standard audio wind noise reduction. Both will be filming in their 10-bit color profiles, with the Action 4 in its 10-bit D-Log-M mode and the Hero 12 in its GP-Log mode. The GoPro is set to a native white balance while the DJI is set to automatic, and both were color graded by me in post. I used the same memory card in both cameras to eliminate that as a potential variable, and both apps were also deleted after registering and updating each camera. I covered my setup extensively in my Osmo Action 4 video last month, so I definitely recommend checking that out for more details on why I do things the way I do, but it can be summed up as a sticky mount on the chin bar of my full-face helmet. Because of this setup, shooting with both cameras mounted onto my helmet at the same time was not possible due to how much strain this would put on my neck while riding. But as I'm going to discuss today, I would argue that video quality alone these days is no longer a deciding factor as to which camera is better for you. So the question today is which one of these two action cameras is the better buy for mountain biking? Now these are two of the flagship offerings of the biggest players on the market, so realistically both of them should be perfectly capable of providing high quality video under the right conditions. Now there's certainly a few differences that are worth talking about in terms of video quality, but as the playing field levels, the user experience becomes a more and more important part of the purchasing decision. The Action 4 is also $50 US cheaper than the GoPro, which means that if they're an equal match for each other in terms of performance, the Action 4 presents a better value. First, let's talk about what we can see in the video. The biggest visible difference between the footage recorded by these two cameras is in their stabilization. As I mentioned earlier, both were set up with the same lowest level of stabilization enabled in order to keep the field of view as wide as possible. When the lighting is good, which means it's bright, diffuse, and consistent, I find the DJI slightly more natural to watch as it tends to roll the camera more in corners like an FPV drone would. This is how your head actually moves while mountain biking, so it translates nicely into video. The GoPro, on the other hand, places a higher emphasis on the yaw direction rather than the roll direction. Now, neither option is wrong, but I do feel that the DJI stabilizes its footage in a way that better lines up with actually riding. Once things start to get darker, however, around sunrise or sunset, the DJI pulls an impressive lead as the GoPro stabilization kind of falls apart. My GoPro footage tended to be significantly shakier in the 2 hours leading up to sunset, and was almost unwatchable by those who experience motion sickness around the actual sunset time. The DJI, on the other hand, provided very stable footage down to low enough light conditions that I struggled to hold my riding pace with how well I could see. If you're looking for an action camera for an alpine sport that often has brighter, more consistent lighting conditions, like skiing or alpine hiking, then the performance gap between these two cameras closes significantly. But for mountain biking in a relatively dark forest environment, the DJI emerges as a clear winner in this category. Next, let's talk about image quality. But before we dive into this category, I'd like to first discuss how people actually consume content. For my long-form content, which excludes my shorts, 37% of my viewers watch on their phone, 28% on their computer, and 27% on their TV. The flagship iPhone 15 Pro Max has a screen resolution of just under around 2.7K, and I would bet that most phones are closer to 1080p than this, with the average phone amazingly being even less. Now, according to the Steam hardware survey, 58% of people who play games on their computer do so on a 1080p monitor, and 19% use a 1440p monitor, and 4% use a 4K monitor. For TVs, approximately 52% of sales last year were either 4K or 8K, meaning that 48% were at a lower resolution than that, and 1080p is apparently still the most commonly sold resolution worldwide. All of these numbers can be summarized by the fact that the majority of viewers consume content at a significantly lower resolution than any of these flagship cameras can output, usually at 1080p. YouTube also compresses your videos upon uploading. There are a few tips and tricks that you can use to minimize the impacts of this compression process, but ultimately it levels the playing field across most manufacturers. All social medias have this issue, but I have the most experience with long-form YouTube content, so that's what I will talk about. For years in the past, I shot 2.7K footage at 60 FPS, despite 4K action cameras being relatively mainstream. And throughout that time, I received more compliments than not on the quality of my footage. I'm definitely a pixel peeper like we all kind of are, but this information provides an important frame of reference for whenever we discuss image quality. Now let's move on to these cameras specifically. If you're looking for an action camera that can primarily take high quality photos to be blown up for printing, then the GoPro has a significant edge over the DJI, as it can take 27 megapixel stills over the DJI's 10 megapixel stills. Now, I've never taken a photo with an action camera on purpose, so the focus of this comparison has to be on video quality. On paper, the GoPro should be able to provide a higher resolving power, as it can shoot up to 5.3K footage, whereas the Action 4 can only shoot up to 4K footage. One of the benefits touted online about 5.3K footage is that it can be reframed to 4K, allowing you to be less precise with your initial setup angle. Although technically true for some applications, mountain biking is not one of them, as cropping in will reduce your overall field of view, which is arguably more important to getting high quality footage than absolute resolution is. The GoPro footage does look marginally higher resolution on my 1440p computer monitor. It also has very slightly less color noise in low light stable environments, but as soon as this footage is destabilized when riding down a trail and compressed by the YouTube algorithm, which usually means downsampling to 4K resolution, I no longer find a significant difference in the image quality when compared to DJI. Both cameras provide excellent image quality in well-lit, well-stabilized situations, so unlike stabilization, the image quality should not be a deciding factor for mountain biking content creators. The higher resolution, the more demanding your footage will also be to process on your computer, to the point where if you are trying to start a YouTube channel on a budget, I would honestly recommend starting at 2.7K or even filming at 1080p. After all, the art of storytelling is more important to a successful YouTube channel than numbers on a spec sheet will ever be. Now let's talk about colors. Both of these two cameras are able to film in 10-bit color, which is what I have been using during my testing period. Assuming that exposure has been metered for correctly, I'm sure a professional colorist could make both cameras look equally good. However, I do find the DJI footage just a little bit easier to color grade as an amateur, and I find myself digging less into the detailed curves and color wheel options. The GoPro required a little bit more scene-to-scene tweaking in terms of contrast, whereas I was usually happy with the DJI's colors after a single grading color profile was copied to all clips throughout a given day. Both cameras can definitely be made to look good, and I'm sure that the automatic in-camera color profiles would simplify your workflow considerably, so color profiles should not be a major factor in your decision-making process. I've always maintained that high-quality audio is as important, if not more important, than high-quality video. Having high-quality audio really helps to immerse the viewer within the scene and make them feel as if they're actually there. I don't know enough about audio hardware to comment on which camera can technically record a wider range of frequencies or intensities, but I can certainly talk to general usability. Now, one of the biggest problems that mountain bike content creators face is wind noise. In the past, I've resorted to using foam wind covers around my GoPro cameras to completely eliminate any wind noise in my videos. This was great, but not ideal for a few reasons. Namely, a foam cover prevents convective cooling and makes the camera significantly more likely to overheat. It also could obscure the corners of the frame if not set up correctly each time, and tends to be somewhat absorbent to water and wet conditions. But if you're looking for the best audio quality possible with zero wind noise, there really is no substitute for a physical third-party foam wind cover for either camera. But if you don't mind a little bit of wind noise, the DJI has a fantastic wind noise reduction algorithm, to the point where I no longer feel the need to run a physical wind cover. The Action 4 removes the overwhelming majority of distracting wind noise from each shot, while keeping the tire, bike, and trail noises present. On the fastest of flow trails, such as in the bike park, there is still some wind noise present, but I honestly kind of enjoy it as it is a great way to convey speed to the viewer. The GoPro, on the other hand, has a slightly more aggressive wind noise reduction algorithm, one that tends to remove some of the trail and bike noise in addition to the wind noise that it is attempting to target. I think that immersive sounds, such as tires gripping on rock and dirt, play an important role in what sets my videos apart to some extent. It's why I've chosen to build such a quiet bike, so if I were to keep using the GoPro, I would likely invest in a foam wind cover. This is a pretty big point for DJI as it makes the camera more enjoyable to use, reduces possible setup errors, and makes it less prone to overheating issues. Now I feel like the Action 4's audio quality and low light stabilization lead to higher quality mountain bike videos a larger percentage of the time. But as I mentioned before, both of these two cameras are perfectly capable of making high quality videos under the right conditions. And as the technological leaps grow fewer and fewer between them, the user experience becomes a larger portion of the equation. I feel like there's a few noteworthy differences between these two cameras and that the DJI is a more enjoyable camera to use on a day-to-day basis. The most obvious user experience improvement would have to be the magnetic mount. DJI pioneered this mount with their previous action cameras and have carried it forward into their Action 4 as an unchanged standard. The fact that you can easily mount and remove your camera in a single second without having to adjust the angle that you're filming at is a huge deal. I hadn't touched the thumb screw on my setup for probably 8 months before filming this comparison, which has helped keep my footage just that little bit more consistent. I've never had to throw away DJI footage due to a bad angle, whereas the same can definitely not be said about my GoPro footage in previous model years. The magnetic mount is also very handy when traveling, where you can put your helmet, or wherever you mount your camera to, into your checked luggage and the camera itself into your carry-on without losing the angle you film at. It's also worth noting that even though the magnet is the most noticeable and arguably the most important part of DJI's mount, there are 2 physical tabs that click and hold the camera into place as well. So you aren't solely relying on the magnet for retention, it just makes things easier to align while installing. Now there's no doubt that GoPro's prong-style mounting standard was a huge leap forward when it was introduced, but using it now makes it feel like a bit of an archaic system in comparison. Once you go to magnetic, it's truly hard to go back, and it's pretty surprising that not all action cameras come with magnetic mounts by now, as they offer a noticeable functional improvement to the end user. Next up we have battery life. Before I started using my Action 3 and Action 4, I used a Hero 10 Black. The GoPro Hero 12 Black shares the same batteries as the Hero 10, which is a nice backwards compatibility detail. The Action 3 and Action 4 also share the same battery, which means that I have significant on-trail experience with both batteries. Now, I haven't performed a scientific test to validate my assumptions, but in my experience, the DJI does offer superior battery life to the GoPro when filming in the settings described. With my GoPros, I always found myself bringing 2, sometimes even 3 batteries along for decently large rides, and I would usually end up using what I brought entirely. With my DJIs, however, I found that I rarely need to bring more than 1 battery, with the only exception being rides over around 2,000 meters or entire days in the bike park. This experience has been consistent with both cameras throughout a wide range of operating temperatures. If you're only going out for a small lap or 2, then battery life will definitely not be an issue with either camera, but if you enjoy going on big adventures or traveling without access to reliable charging, the increased battery life of the DJI does provide you with some additional peace of mind. I also find the multifunction battery charging case that comes with the DJI's Adventure Combo to be fantastic. It's a much nicer form factor to throw in a backpack, the LEDs provide a quick indication of charging status at a glance, and it can be used in reverse as a battery bank to power devices on the trail. GoPro's dual battery charger is approximately the same price, only $4 less, and provides none of the additional functionality that I just mentioned. This makes the Adventure Combo an incredibly obvious upgrade if you're more serious about content creation, and would likely be splurging on the additional batteries anyways. Next is a very small detail, but one that makes my experience with the Action 4 that much more enjoyable, and that is the lack of Morse code style beeps. I used to use the GoPro for years, and eventually you do start to learn what each number of beeps represents, but this still involves a conscious counting effort every time the camera beeps, and if you switch modes by accident, have trouble hearing it in a noisy environment or above a conversation, then you're left to guess which state the camera is currently in and have to take off your helmet. I have a lot of accidental photos from my previous GoPros and from my Action 3. But with the Action 4, every common operation has its own unique sound. Whenever the camera turns off, turns on, starts recording, stops recording, or changes to a photo or video mode, you know exactly what is happening since each has a very distinct sound, spoken word, or melody. To me, this is a big deal. There's no ambiguity, there's no guesswork, you always know what's going on with the camera without ever having to look at it or take your helmet off. Going back to the beeps has been surprisingly rough. Anything that increases efficiency is a great thing in my book, and never having to take off and put on your sweaty helmet makes me a happy user. Not that you'd have to take off your helmet anyways with the magnetic mount. Another small detail is the fact that the Action 4 has dual touchscreens. This isn't a big deal for me personally, but I did make some use out of it when I was setting up the camera initially. What I found was a bigger deal is the Action 4's rear touchscreen is a bit more responsive on the trail, especially with gloves on. It also works a bit better with dry hands, but isn't so sensitive as to accidentally trip while riding in soaking wet weather. This isn't a big deal, as once you dial in the settings on either camera, they are truly set and forget for footage consistency. But if you enjoy experimenting with different settings or modes, or want to treat it more as a travel camera, then the touchscreen sensitivity is helpful, and I found that the DJI menus were slightly more intuitive to navigate. The last pro in favor of DJI would be their ecosystem. Content creation is a battle these days, and the bar keeps getting raised with every passing year. Action cameras have gotten incredibly good, to the point where riding fast with a flagship camera like either of these two is almost enough to provide you with top-tier footage. This means that in order to stand out above the sea of sameness, you have to raise your production quality to a level above the rest, which often involves the use of additional tools or additional cameras. DJI has built quite the product catalog between drones, handheld gimbals, and high-quality mics, and many of these products have been designed specifically with compatibility and user experience in mind. The two examples that come to mind here are that DJI's newest drones, Pocket 3 and Action 4, all share very similar color science, so they can be color graded more consistently with relative ease, and their Bluetooth microphone that wirelessly pairs with the Action 4. On the other hand, GoPro has the Max Lens Mod 2.0, which is a nice way of achieving an extremely wide field of view without having to resort to a dedicated 360 camera. I've not gotten the chance to try out this mod yet, but the extremely wide field of view appears to be tailored more for short-form content than long-form content due to the equally extreme distortion that occurs. For skiing or hiking, I could see this feature being a real benefit, but for mountain biking, I think DJI is already quite close to the sweet spot in terms of ideal field of view and minimum distortion. Maybe a touch wider in the next generation would be perfect. GoPro also has the Media mod, which presents higher quality audio in an impressive form factor. But in my opinion, it lacks the versatility that a dedicated wireless mic would provide, and versatility like that is what budding content creators would likely appreciate. GoPro also has a Light mod, which is largely targeted toward their vlogging audience, more so than a mountain bike one. Both brands offer replaceable ND filters, Bluetooth remotes, batteries, extension arms, and more mounts than you will ever know what to do with, especially if you use my superior single sticky mount setup. There was one user experience detail that I definitely preferred with the GoPro, and that would be the buttons. The raised buttons are easier to find with gloves on or without taking my helmet off, and they provide a more tactile and audible engagement. In other words, they feel more like a mechanical keyboard and less like a bubble membrane. They're also a little bit easier to press. In the end, both of these two cameras can produce high quality videos in the right situations. I think that the GoPro has the advantage when it comes to photography, and also produces slightly less color noise in stable low light situations. I don't feel like its 5.3K footage is a significant advantage by the time it gets compressed and consumed onto social media. Now, the DJI has a distinct advantage in stabilization, especially in low light situations, which lead to higher quality footage a larger percentage of the time. The Action 4 also has an improved wind noise reduction algorithm that doesn't overcompensate and remove trail noise, which means that you won't have to use a physical foam wind cover for ideal audio quality. I also found the Action 4's 10-bit color profile to be slightly easier to color grade, although that's likely something that can be evened out with more practice. For me, I would choose the Action 4 solely on its ability to produce higher quality footage a larger percentage of the time. But once we start to take into account the entire user experience, I believe that the Action 4 emerges as a clear winner for mountain bike content creators. The magnetic mount makes filming considerably more consistent and repeatable. The user interface is cleverly designed, using unique sounds for common operations like turning on or off or starting and stopping recording, so you don't need to learn Morse code or look at the screen. And the charging case in the Adventure Bundle offers more features and better value than GoPro's dual battery charger. The Action 4 manages to do all of this while also being $50 cheaper. But most importantly, I just enjoy using this camera more, and I'm much more likely to bring a camera along that I enjoy using. It's just like bike parts, the best components are the ones that you never have to think about. Let me know what you think of both cameras in the comments below, and thanks again to DJI for sponsoring this video.